Hello everyone! Welcome to my ever first vlog. I'm Jessa Gumisong and I would like to share to you my reflection about the Philippine history which I read in the book. First, we will tackle the introduction to Philippine historiography. Second is the history of Philippine Islands. Third, we have here the Manonggol jar. Fourth, Dalgona copper plate. Fifth, we have the duties of Katipunan. Sixth, we have here the pre-16th century here in Philippines. The seventh, we have 16th to 18th century in Philippines. Eighth, we have the 19th century. Nine, we have the Philippine Revolution in 1896. And for the last one, our topic is the Kabuti Mutiny by it is written by my professor Roland L.A. Dalagan. Okay, and now let's first discuss the introduction to Philippine historiography. You might confuse what is historiography. It is the same as the history or not? Okay, we will discuss that by then. The historiography is a written history. It is all a fact about what happened way back then here in our country in Philippines. And history is the past events. And also, the writer of history, which, for example, we have a writer that write the history, which we call the historiography. So the writer, we call them as a historians. And in writing a historical research, the historian have two sources. First is the primary sources, which the fact from the people that present in that event happened way back then. And the second source is the work of people long enough after the event happened. And the historians used a descriptive or narrative analytical method in writing historical research. That was the introduction to Philippine history. We have the history, the historians, and the historiography. And now, let's go to the history of Philippine Islands way back then. The ruler of the island before the Spaniards came is what we call chiefs of the island. And the slavery is presented in that time. There are different people that time. There's chiefs, the timagwas, the noble family, and the slave. And before the Spaniards came, the Filipino have different clothing way back before. Different for chiefs, different for noble family, different for the slave, different for timagwas. Their clothing presented what status their family is. Okay. And the gender equality is not presented at time because the chieftainship way back before in the Philippine Island, the history of Philippine Island, is only for a man. So the woman can't rule the island. Even if you're a daughter of a chief, you can't rule the island because you're a woman. And way back before the Spaniards came, the Filipinos exactly didn't know God because they worship evil more than the God because the devil brainwashed them according to the book of Torrentera. And now let's go to the Manonggol jar. The Manonggol jar way back then is the second burial jar of our ancient Filipinos. Accordingly, the Manonggol jar excavated from a Neolithic burial site in a Manonggol cave of Tabon Caves at Lipon at Palawan, 890 to 710 before Christ's era. According to the book of Tarantara, the Manonggol jar was founded by Dr. Robert B. Fox and Miguel Antonio way back in 1962. What is the significance of Manonggol jar that time? Let's answer the question. The Manonggol jar is significant because it explains how ancient Filipinos valued each tribe that time. In this era, 2023, before we buried in the soil the deceased Filipino, we used coffin. The deceased or the dead, we will put it in the coffin and then buried under the soil. But way back then, the deceased Filipino will put in their secondary burial jar, which is the Manonggol jar. And now, of course, the Manonggol jar is significant in Philippines because it is the second burial jar way back then in Philippine history. And now let's go to Laguna Copper Plate. Why is Laguna Copper Plate is significant? Why it is part of our history here in our country, the Philippines? Okay, let's first discuss the discovery of the Laguna Copper Plate. Accordingly, the Laguna Copper Plate is discovered around 1987. It is a thin piece of copper plate measuring about 20 by 20 centimeter. According that the copper plate is an official documents, more precisely an acquaintance inscribed in the Shaka year 822. Way back then, there is no calendar that time. So the Laguna Copper Plate is part of the history because it is the earliest calendar way back then. It pushed back the start of the Philippine history by 600 years. How significant the Laguna Copper Plate is. So that's why it is part of our Philippine history. And now let's go to the duties of Katipunan. There are 10 duties of Katipunan, but I will be discussing only the first duty of Katipunero. It is the duties of Katipunan is created by Andres Bonifacio, which we all know that our hero. Okay, the first duty of Katipunero or the Katipunan is love God heartedly. The Katipunero must love God with all his heart. The Filipino that time worship God because Andres Bonifacio want every Filipino, every member of Katipunan love God heartedly. There are nine more duties of Katipunan, but if you want to dig more about it, please visit at National Bookstore here in Philippines, and you can find a book about the Philippine history, the duties of Katipunan, so you can gain more knowledge about the duties of Katipunan. And now let's forward to pre-16th century. Okay, in pre-16th century, the Homo sapiens is presented at time. Homo floresiensis discovered on the island of Flores according to the book of Tortura. Accordingly, the Calao Cave metatarsal indicates that species of hominin crossed water gaps between Sundaland and Wallacea to reach northern Luzon by 67,000 years ago. Accordingly, the Homo sapiens recent fieldwork was undertaken by Archaeological Division of the National Museum of our country, which is the Philippines. If you want to dig more about the pre-16th century, please visit the National Museum of the Philippines. And now, and also before I forgot, in pre-16th century, the deceased Filipino will be disposed in traditional way. Let's forward to 16th to 18th century here in Philippines. Way back then in 16th to 18th century, there is no president. Only because it is the island. It is the island. Island by island by island. Many island here in Philippines. And accordingly, the ruler of the barangay, there is a barangay that time. So the rule of the barangay is called chiefs or tatus. And we all know if someone or if you'll be watching my blog way back in our elementary days, we discuss the teacher discussed as the thought as the datus, that the datus were the chiefs of or the ruler of the barangay in 16th to 18th century here in Philippines. And we all know that datus were captain of the war that time, that century. And the slavery is present at the time also. The slavery, of course, the datus, the chief. We have a noble family. And now, way back then, the native people has no intelligence. Very pitiful. And in 16th to 18th century, they because the native Filipinos didn't have a intelligence, they rebelled. They rebelled and enslaved Spaniard in 17th century. Of course, we Filipinos don't want to be enslaved by a people from other country because slavery is unfair to every human. And let's forward to 19th century. That time there is a town. So in 19th century, the town is headed by what we call the Gobernador Silio. And that time in 19th century, the Spaniards were so high pride and glory of themselves. During the 19th century, the term Filipino was only used to refer pale-born Spanish residents in the colony. It is the century who presented Marcelo H. del Pilar with his work that stated the greedy of friars in the Philippines. So our our hero Marcelo H. del Pilar is present at 19th century way back then. So he wrote that time about the greedy of the friars in Filipinos here in our country in Philippines. Of course, because of the greedy of the Spanish in Filipinos, the revolution in Philippines arise. In 1896, in the Filipino rebelled to be freed from the Spanish government. Accordingly, the Declaration of Independence in Philippines was June 12, 1896. It was Antonio Renzares Bautista proclaimed the independence of our country. And also, Bautista is a lawyer and advisor to General Emilio Aguinaldo. We all know Emilio Aguinaldo because he is one of our heroes in Philippines. The head of the Katipunan is Emilio Jacinto. And way back then, in Philippine Revolution 1896, Andres Bonifacio sent letter to Julio Nakpil way back February 13, 1879, and he sent also a letter to Emilio Jacinto way back April 16, 1897. And of course, the revolution arise because the Filipino don't want to be slave by the Spanish, and the greedy friars. Of course, the Filipino is rebel that time because they can take the greedy how greedy the Spanish are. The Spanish want the Filipinos to be slave by them, and it is so unfair for us. It is so unfair for our Asian. It is so unfair for tribe that time way back in 19th century. And last, for our 10th topic, we will be discussing the Cavite Mutiny. Cavite Mutiny is on February way back on way back on January 20, 1872. Accordingly, brief uprising of 200 Filipino troops and workers at the Cavite Island because they don't want to be slave by the Spanish. It is the Cavite Mutiny of 1872. The 200 Filipino residents of Cavite uh, didn't understand, don't want the Spanish government in the Cavite that time in 18 way back 1872. So the movements in Cavite, accordingly, a Cavite Mutiny movement were headed by Sergeant La Madrid, a native of Bohol. The Cavite Mutiny aimed of natives to get rid of Spanish government. And that's all for today's video. I hope I will be able to share to you next time. I will dig more about the Philippine history. I will share to you my reflection about it, so you could gain more knowledge. And see you next time. See you.